The parking ticket fluttering under her windshield wiper should have been the final insult to an already disastrous evening. But when Maya reached for it, her hand froze mid-air. This wasn't a ticket. The paper was cream-colored, expensive, and folded with deliberate care. Her name was written across it in handwriting so shaky it looked like it had been penned during an earthquake. Inside, just 3 words stopped her heart. Please look underneath. Maya's first date with Daniel had been a catastrophe of epic proportions. He'd spilled water on himself within the first 5 minutes, knocked over the bread basket reaching for the salt, and spent most of dinner nervously rambling about his childhood goldfish. When he'd asked for a second date, she'd politely declined, citing her busy work schedule, her complicated life, anything to soften the blow of rejection. She'd felt guilty watching his face fall, but she'd convinced herself it was kinder than leading him on. Now standing alone in the dimly lit parking garage, she knelt beside her car with trembling hands and peered underneath the chassis. What she saw made absolutely no sense at first. There were tools scattered beneath her vehicle, a small hydraulic jack, rags stained with black grease, and a neat pile of metal fragments that looked like they'd been carefully extracted from somewhere important. Maya's mind raced as she tried to piece together what she was looking at. And then she saw the second note, this one tucked under her rear tire, protected by a small stone. Her throat tightened as she read Daniel's shaky handwriting again. Your brake line was severed, almost completely cut through. I saw fluid dripping when we walked to our cars. I couldn't let you drive. I'm so sorry I made you wait. I called the police. They're coming. Please stay here. You're safe now. If you believe in guardian angels, in second chances, in the kindness of strangers who become heroes, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment sharing your thoughts, and subscribe to our channel. Your support means everything, and it helps us continue sharing stories that matter. The world tilted sideways as the full weight of understanding crashed over Maya like a wave. While she'd been inside the restaurant, carefully composing her rejection, trying to find the gentlest words to let Daniel down, someone had been in this parking garage tampering with her car. If she had driven home on the interstate as planned, if she had accelerated to highway speeds, if she had needed to brake suddenly in traffic, the compromised line would have failed. She would have had no way to stop. The thought of what could have happened, what almost certainly would have happened, made her legs give out. She sat down hard on the concrete, her designer dress pooling around her, her carefully applied makeup now streaking down her face as tears came unbidden. Daniel hadn't been nervous because he was awkward or socially inept. He'd been terrified because he'd discovered something horrifying and had been trying to figure out how to tell her without causing panic in a crowded restaurant. All those rambling stories, the knocked-over bread basket, the spilled water, they were the actions of a man whose mind was somewhere else entirely, torn between the need to keep her calm and safe inside the restaurant, while he figured out what to do about the danger waiting outside. And when she'd rejected him, when she'd said no to a second date with that pitying smile she'd practiced in mirrors, he could have simply walked away. He could have told himself he'd done his due diligence by mentioning it. He could have sent a text message and driven home to his own life. Instead, he'd spent what must have been hours lying on the dirty garage floor in his date clothes, using his own tools from his own car to make hers safe again. The police arrived within minutes, their flashing lights painting the concrete walls in alternating blue and red. Maya found herself telling the story through hiccuping sobs, showing them the notes pointing to the evidence Daniel had carefully preserved beneath her car. The officers exchanged serious looks as they examined the brake line, photographed the clean cut that could only have been made deliberately, and called for additional units. One of them, a kind-faced woman with gray streaking her temples, wrapped a blanket around Maya's shoulders even though the garage wasn't cold. She explained that there had been 3 similar incidents in the area over the past 2 months, all targeting women who dined alone or with dates at upscale restaurants. The perpetrator would follow them to the parking garage and sabotage their vehicles, then follow them when they left, waiting for the inevitable accident on the highway. It was, the officer said with barely contained rage, a particularly evil method of attack because it looked like an accident, left no witnesses, and gave the predator time to position himself as a helpful bystander or worse. Maya felt sick imagining what could have happened, what had likely happened to other women who hadn't had their own unlikely guardian watching over them. She gave her statement mechanically, her mind still circling back to Daniel to his nervous hands and worried eyes, to the way he'd kept glancing toward the door throughout dinner. She'd mistaken his anxiety for social awkwardness, his distraction for disinterest, his rambling for inability to hold a conversation. She'd been so wrapped up in her own discomfort, so focused on planning her exit strategy, that she'd completely missed the fact that he was trying to save her life. The police had Daniel's contact information from the initial call he'd made. They told Maya he'd refused to leave the garage until they arrived, that he'd been standing guard by the entrance to make sure no one approached her vehicle, that he'd given them a detailed statement and description of a suspicious man he'd seen lingering near the cars earlier. He'd done all of this after she'd rejected him, after she'd made it clear she had no interest in seeing him again, after he had every reason to feel hurt or angry or simply indifferent to her fate. But Daniel hadn't been any of those things. He'd been heroic in the quietest, most selfless way imaginable. Maya drove home that night in a police escort, her car repaired enough to be safe but scheduled for a complete brake system replacement in the morning. She couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw two different versions of the same evening. In one, she drove home alone as planned, her brake pedal going soft on the interstate, her car careening out of control, her life ending in twisted metal and shattered glass. In the other, the real one, a nervous man with kind eyes and shaky hands worked alone in a dark garage to make sure that nightmare never came true. She'd spent the entire date judging him, cataloging his flaws, planning her escape. He'd spent it saving her. The next morning, Maya did something she hadn't done in years. She called in sick to her high-pressure job at the marketing firm, ignored the 17 emails already waiting in her inbox, and drove to the address the police had given her with Daniel's permission. He lived in a modest apartment complex on the east side of town, the kind of place where children's bikes clustered around doorways, and neighbors actually knew each other's names. She sat in her car for 10 minutes trying to find words big enough to contain what she needed to say, knowing that nothing would be adequate. Daniel answered the door in sweatpants and an old college t-shirt, his hair sticking up in several directions, his eyes widening in genuine surprise when he saw her. Before he could speak, before he could ask why she was there or invite her in or do anything polite and normal, Maya started talking. She told him everything. She told him about her assumptions, her judgments, her carefully planned rejection speech. She told him about the terror she'd felt in the parking garage, the understanding that had crashed over her, the debt she could never repay. She told him about lying awake all night thinking about the life she still had because of his kindness, his courage, his fundamental decency. And then, with tears streaming down her face for the second time in 12 hours, she told him the truth she'd spent years denying, that she'd been so focused on finding someone perfect that she'd forgotten to look for someone good. Daniel listened without interrupting, his expression soft and understanding in a way that made Maya's heart ache. When she finally ran out of words, he smiled that same nervous smile from the restaurant and said something that would stay with her forever. "I didn't do it for a second date. Maya, I did it because it was right, because you deserve to get home safe, because everyone deserves that." If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that heroes don't always look the way we expect them to, if it made you think about the people you might have overlooked or underestimated, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and leave a comment below. Tell us about a time someone showed you unexpected kindness. Tell us about the heroes in your own life. And if you believe in second chances, in looking past first impressions, in the power of one person's choice to change everything, type "second chances matter" in the comments right now. 3 months later, Maya and Daniel had their second first date. This time she saw him clearly, the way his hands moved with confidence when he talked about his work as a civil engineer, the way his eyes crinkled when he laughed, the way his kindness wasn't awkwardness but authenticity. She saw the man who had literally crawled under a car in his dress clothes to save a woman who had just rejected him. She saw the man who had taught her that sometimes the best people come wrapped in unexpected packages, that sometimes the love stories we dismiss in the first chapter turn out to be the ones worth reading until the very last page. And when he asked at the end of that perfect evening if she'd like to see him again, Maya said yes, and yes again, and yes to every question that followed, because she'd learned that second chances aren't just about the chances we give others. Sometimes they're about the chances we give ourselves to see what was there all along, waiting patiently to be noticed, to be valued, to be loved. The man who saved her life had also saved her from a future of almost right relationships and carefully managed expectations. He'd shown her that real love isn't perfect. It's present. It's willing to get its hands dirty. It shows up when it matters most.